It was never supposed to be heard again. Yet the voice crackled through the intercom like a whisper pulled from the grave. A woman's voice, trembling and dry, said, "Why did you open it?" The guard froze. Not because he recognized her, but because he shouldn't have. No one had spoken from inside Vault 6 for decades. The facility's protocol stated that the cryochambers were sealed, powered, and isolated. A silent tomb of preserved flesh and suspended time. He stood there, heart drumming too loud, sweat sliding cold down the back of his neck. The silence that followed felt like the world had stopped breathing. No radio chatter. No humming machinery. Just that one question, hanging in the stale air. This wasn't just a system glitch. This was personal, intimate, and impossibly real. There had been no footsteps, no sound of someone entering. Yet now, the monitors in security room C flickered, all showing Vault 620. A red light blinked beneath the footage. Someone had manually overridden the lock, and inside the chamber, a figure was moving. Slowly, deliberately. He hadn't opened anything. He wasn't supposed to be here tonight. And the voice knew him. The facility didn't ask for questions. It paid for silence. And when he signed the non-disclosure contract, it wasn't with ink, but dread. The kind that settles behind the ribs and waits. He remembered how the woman across the table had spoken, not like a recruiter, but like a warden. "You're not here to investigate. You're here to maintain stability. That's all." And back then, that had felt safe. Mechanical. Simple. Duh. But now, standing in that corridor with Vault 6 blinking red, stability felt like a fantasy someone sold him. He pressed the intercom button, his voice shaking. "This is Officer Lane. Please repeat." No answer. Just a static hush that clung like breath in winter. That voice, it didn't just know his name. It knew what he'd done before this job. Before he buried everything. Vault 6 wasn't just a number. It was a memory. A secret he hadn't allowed himself to relive. Until now. The chamber knew him. And maybe, just maybe, it had been waiting. Lane had worked security jobs before. Banks, clinics, one unremarkable corporate building that paid in delay and monotony. But this was different. Here, nothing moved. No patients. No staff beyond the techs who rotated shifts in silence. Everything here slept, or pretended to. Lane had spent weeks walking the same corridors, memorizing the echo patterns of his boots, watching frost grow in the same corners. The job was predictable. Cold. Comforting in its deadness. But something shifted tonight. The silence felt heavier, like a breath being held too long. When Lane reviewed footage from earlier in the night, Vault 6 had no activity. Then at 3:06, the file corrupted. Only 1 second of usable footage remained, a blurred frame showing Lane's own reflection in the chamber glass. Except, he hadn't been near Vault 6 that night. Not until the voice called him there. Lane stared at the corrupted footage frame, heart caught in his throat. His reflection looked wrong, like a version of himself suspended mid-scream. No audio. Just static, skipping visuals, and that grotesque image. He reached toward the screen instinctively, fingertips brushing the glass. The reflection flickered, shifted, blinked. Not him. Not him. Not possible. A glitch. It had to be. But his gut twisted like it had when he first held a weapon in a place he shouldn't have been, years ago, before the facility, before all of this. He backed away from the console, breath uneven. There was something behind the glass, in Vault 6. Something watching him wearing a shape too close to his own. He whispered under his breath, "What the hell are you?" But deep down he already knew the answer. Or feared it. The hallway outside Vault 6 was quiet again. No movement. No sound. Just the low hum of power flowing to ancient machines. Lane stood outside the chamber door, unsure if he was about to witness a miracle or a mistake. He reached for the access panel, hesitating as his fingers hovered over the keypad. A part of him begged to walk away. Another part whispered that he had already come too far. The door's surface was cold beneath his palm, vibrating faintly, like a heartbeat. Then, the panel clicked. The lock disengaged on its own. Lane took a step back, but the door didn't open. It waited. And so did he, trapped between duty and dread. Inside, the figure shifted again. This wasn't a malfunction. It was a message. From someone, or something, that remembered. The next morning arrived with no sunlight. Not that it mattered. The facility existed beneath the earth, untouched by sky or storm, encased in reinforced concrete and secrets. Lane sat at the edge of his cot, eyes bloodshot, shoulders slumped, still in uniform. He hadn't slept. The voice, her voice, haunted the walls, replaying in his head with every blink. Why did you open it? It wasn't a question anymore. It was an accusation. The living quarters were bare. Metal walls, a narrow sink, a static-filled radio that never played music. He'd chosen this assignment because it was empty. Because no one here asked about before. Now the silence mocked him. He thought of her, not the voice, but the woman she once was. He had buried that memory under layers of purpose. The contract said, forget. But Vault 6 had remembered. Lane stood and looked at himself in the mirror above the sink. Same face. Different eyes. Something inside him was waking up. Something he had fought hard to silence. There had been a photo once. He remembered keeping it tucked inside his locker door, hidden under his duty roster. A young woman with laughing eyes, wind in her hair, holding a cigarette like it wasn't a vice, but a rebellion. He had loved her the way men love, when they don't yet know what grief can do. But after she disappeared, after the investigations and the silence that followed, he signed the papers that led him here. Not out of curiosity but desperation. Cryonics was just a job. A paycheck for ghosts. He opened his locker now, hands shaking slightly. The photo was gone. The paper had yellowed where it used to be taped. In its place was a scrap of torn cloth, deep blue, frayed at the edges, stained with something dry and brown. It hadn't been there before. Lane clenched it in his fist. He couldn't pretend anymore. This wasn't a coincidence. It was personal. Someone, or something, was reminding him of what he tried to erase. The facility kept no history. That was part of the point. Names became numbers. Stories were turned into data. Each chamber was labeled with a date, a code, and nothing else. No names. No causes. No past. Lane walked through the corridor of vaults now, passing rows of cryopods like polished coffins. He stopped at Vault 6. The display screen was dark. He tapped the console. It blinked to life, but the registry was blank. No subject ID. No record. As if it had never existed. He scanned for anomalies. The system looped. Same 3 lines of code. Same static-filled entry. But then something new flashed for a second. A name. Her name. Gone before he could capture it. Lane whispered it anyway, as if saying it aloud made her real again. Mara. He hadn't spoken that name in 7 years. His voice cracked beneath it. And from somewhere inside Vault 6, the frost shifted. 7 years ago Mara vanished. No note. No trail. Just silence. The police suspected escape. Friends whispered suicide. But Lane knew better. She had been afraid of something. She spoke once of being followed, of men in suits who asked too many questions, of waking up with blood on her sheets and no memory of how. He didn't believe her back then. Thought it was trauma. Thought she was unraveling. Now, he wondered if she had been trying to warn him. If the only reason he was here, hired, placed, protected, was because he had once loved her. And because someone needed him close to this place when it finally woke. The camera feed outside Vault 6 glitched again. This time, a single frame held steady, her face. Frozen. Da. Eyes open. Da. Not sleeping. Watching. Lane fell to his knees. The weight of it all pressed into his chest. He hadn't lost her. He had left her. Lane sat alone in the break room. Lights dimmed, coffee cold and untouched. The hum of the vending machine was the only sound. He didn't know how long he'd been there. Time inside the facility stretched like shadows, slow, uncertain, artificial. The photo, the voice, the cloth, the name. None of it could be ignored anymore. She was here. And somehow, she had never left. But why hadn't she aged? How had her pod remained active without records? Lane thought of the protocols. Emergency fail-safes, termination codes, cryo malfunctions. He thought of pulling the plug. But what if she wasn't dead? What if she wasn't alone in there? The lights above him flickered once. Then again. The walls seemed to hum louder, more rhythmic. The facility wasn't just awake. It was watching him. And whatever secrets it held, they were no longer buried. They were rising. The director's office was off limits, one of the few places Lane had never entered in his months here. But something had changed. The door was ajar. He stepped inside slowly, expecting alarms, resistance, but the room welcomed him with silence. Rows of old filing cabinets stood like relics, coated in dust. No digital locks, no biometric scans. Analog. Dutchy. Intentionally. He rifled through files, fingers trembling. Most were empty. Redacted. But one folder remained unsealed. Inside, a black and white photo. Mara, strapped to a gurney, eyes wide with something that wasn't fear. It was fury. Stamped across the top in bold type, Volunteer 376, Project Reentry. Lane staggered back. Volunteer? She never volunteered for anything. A document slid from the file, signed consent. Her name. His signature. The date blurred, but the penstroke was unmistakable. He had signed her away. Not in love. In fear. Outside the director's office, the lights in the hallway flickered to life one by one, as if guiding him somewhere. Lane followed, not because he trusted it, but because resistance felt irrelevant now. The walls pulsed with a low hum, as though the facility itself had a heartbeat. He descended to sub-level 3, a restricted floor he had been told was non-operational. But the elevator accepted his access code. And when the doors opened, it wasn't darkness that greeted him, but sterile white light and silence thick enough to choke. Rows of cryo chambers lined the corridor, but these were different, smaller, sleeker, newer. Each chamber bore no names, only timestamps. Lane walked past them slowly, until he reached one that had no frost, no glow. Just fingerprints on the inside of the glass. He placed his hand against it, and for a breathless moment, it was warm. The personnel logs were stored in a terminal mounted to the wall, voice access only. Lane stared at the mic input, then spoke softly. Operator ID. Lane, security clearance level 4. The machine processed. Then replied, clearance level insufficient. Override accepted. Subject linked to Volunteer 376. Access granted. Lane blinked. Linked? A list of cryo subjects unfolded on the screen. Most encrypted, some flagged as terminated. But one stood out. Subject 376. Active. Biological sync at 97%. Cognitive latency reduced. Notes included phrases like residual memory, leakage, and target emotional response achieved. It wasn't a vault. It was an experiment. And he was part of the variable. Lane felt his throat tighten. He wasn't just here to guard her. He was the trigger. The speaker above him cracked with static, then hissed out a low rhythmic sound, like slow breathing. Lane stepped back, eyes wide. It wasn't mechanical. It was biological. The air grew colder. Lights dimmed. Every pod around him flickered once, then stabilized. But Vault 6 remained dark. A whisper followed, not from the speaker but from inside his head. Not words. Memory. A conversation he didn't remember having. Mara saying, "If they ever bring me back, don't let them keep me." The phrase echoed through his skull like thunder underwater. Lane turned and ran. Past the terminals. Past the pods. Toward the stairs. The facility wasn't just tracking him. It was activating him. And every step he took now was pulling him deeper into something designed around him. Around her. And something neither of them consented to. He reached the stairwell, chest heaving, palms slick with sweat. The facility groaned, not with age, but with awareness. Something had awakened, and it was no longer confined to Vault 6. Lane gripped the railing, fighting nausea as the walls around him pulsed faintly. For a second, his vision blurred. He wasn't in the stairwell anymore. He saw Mara, floating inside the pod, eyes open, skin pale, but her mouth moved. Speaking. To him. You promised. Lane staggered, blinking hard. Back in the stairwell. Alone. Cold. Alive. He didn't remember promising. But his mind was no longer his own. Whatever they had done to her, to him, it was beginning to unravel. And now the only way forward was through. No more questions. No more pretending he was just the guard. Lane took a breath and descended deeper. Lane emerged into a room he didn't recognize. It wasn't on any blueprint. A circular chamber carved from raw stone, surrounded by massive cryotanks embedded into the walls. This wasn't a lab. It was a shrine. At the center stood a medical chair, wires dangling like roots, red stains soaked into the floor beneath it. On a nearby monitor, live data flickered. Not just vital signs but emotional graphs, memory stimulation reports, and a single entry at the bottom. Subject Mara, neural loop active, cycle 453. She had been in a loop, not frozen. Awake. Replaying the same pain, the same memory. Lane stepped toward the chair. There were claw marks on the armrests. Old. Deep. Bite. She had fought. Not to escape, but to forget. They made her remember. Over and over. For data. For results. Lane whispered, "I didn't know." But somewhere, deep inside, he feared he had. Behind him, a door hissed open. A voice followed, calm, clinical, inhuman. "You shouldn't be here, Mr. Lane." A man stepped out of the shadowed corridor beyond. Mid-50s, pristine lab coat, wire-rimmed glasses, expression carved from stone. Lane recognized him. Not from here, but from a memory long buried. He was the one who conducted the intake interview. The one who told Mara it would be painless. "You said she volunteered," Lane muttered. The man tilted his head. "She did, after her cognitive filtration was complete." Lane's fists clenched. "You rewrote her." The scientist smiled slightly. "We optimized her." Lane stepped forward. "Why? Because pain is data, and love is the perfect tether." Lane's breath caught. This wasn't a science facility. It was a machine that fed on memory, on connection, and he had delivered the most important piece of it. Lane grabbed the scientist by the collar and slammed him into the wall. "End it," he said through clenched teeth. "Let her out." The scientist didn't resist. "You misunderstand," he said. "You're not here to save her. You're here to stabilize her." Lane stared, his grip faltering. "Her memory rejected the loop," the man continued. "Your presence resets the emotional core. Without you, the system breaks. She breaks." Lane felt the floor tilt beneath him. They didn't just preserve Mara. They weaponized her grief. And Lane, he was the anchor. Not a guard. A variable. A variable they had manipulated to keep her from waking, to keep her compliant. What happens if I leave? Lane asked. Then the memory collapses. She remembers everything. Lane stepped back slowly. Good, he whispered. Let her remember. The alarms didn't trigger. The facility didn't fight him. It was as if it wanted this. The final break in protocol. Lane returned to Vault 6, footsteps echoing like gunshots. The pod was open now. Not broken. Opened. What? Frost trailed from the edges like breath. Inside, Mara sat upright. Awake. Eyes red from strain, skin pale and damp with cold. She looked at him. Not with joy. Not with rage. But with recognition. How many times? She asked. Lane swallowed. Too many. She nodded slowly. Then, this is the last. Her fingers trembled as she reached for his hand. No dramatic reunion. No salvation. Just a woman trying to hold on to the pieces of herself they hadn't stolen. Lane knelt beside her, silent. He didn't offer promises. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He simply stayed. This was hers now. She stood on trembling legs. The pod hissed one last time as it shut down for good. Lights flickered above, not in malfunction, but transition. The system was letting go. Lane supported her as they walked toward the exit, every step echoing the end of something unnatural. On a nearby console, her vitals blinked red, then black. Offline. No alarms. No protests. Just stillness. She paused at the threshold. Will they come for us? Lane shook his head. They already have. This was never about us escaping. It was about ending the loop. Mara smiled faintly. Not warmth, relief. She had carried the pain long enough. Outside the chamber, the air tasted like rust and silence. They didn't run. They didn't look back. The facility didn't stop them. It only watched as they disappeared into the dark, finally unknowable. The command center wasn't locked. It welcomed them like it knew the story had reached its final chapter. Screens lined the walls, not for observation, but for remembrance. Footage looped endlessly, Mara laughing, Mara crying, Mara screaming into silence. Each scene tagged Cycle 38, Cycle 114, Cycle 251. Lane stood in the center of the room as the lights above dimmed. One final recording played. Mara's voice, ragged and quiet. This isn't the first time he's let me die. Lane froze. Mara didn't look at the camera. She looked at him, as if she knew where he'd be. He keeps choosing himself. Lane turned to her. I didn't know. Mara whispered. You chose to forget. The air cracked. Every screen went dark. Lane staggered back as if struck. This wasn't just memory. It was a prison. And every time she screamed, he walked away. Until now. Lane slammed his fist against the central console. The system responded, a monotone voice echoing. Neural cycle terminated. Final input required. He looked to Mara. She said nothing, eyes fixed on the black screens. Her breath shook. They made you relive everything, Lane said. Every time you reached for me, I wasn't there. Mara stepped forward, voice thin. You were. You just turned away. The console beeped. Final input. Lane stared at the blinking prompt. What do I do? Mara didn't answer. She walked to the terminal, fingers trembling as she typed a single line. Let him see. The room darkened. The screens flickered once more, but this time, it wasn't her memories. It was his. Lane fell to his knees, as scenes he'd buried returned in brutal detail. Not watching her suffer. Walking away. Over and over. I did this, he whispered. I let them. Silence fell. Not empty, dense. Lane stood slowly, his face pale, wet with sweat. Mara watched him, arms crossed over her chest like armor. Why did you come back? She asked. Lane struggled for words. I thought I was protecting you. Her expression didn't change. You were protecting yourself. The console beeped again. Subject 376, emotional sync complete. Terminate cycle. Lane stepped forward. His hand hovered over the command. I don't know what this does, he said. It ends the loop, Mara said. Or it ends me. Lane turned to her. I'll stay. I'll go back in. She shook her head. You're not part of the loop anymore. You never were. You were the excuse. Lane's eyes filled. I am sorry. Mara turned away. Then let me go. The words hit harder than any scream. And yet, they were calm. Final. .1. Unforgiving. Lane entered the shutdown code. The system paused, then said, Cognitive loop terminated. Subject autonomy restored. The lights flickered once, then dimmed. For the first time in years, Mara was free. She staggered slightly, clutching her head. The release wasn't clean. It burned. Lane reached out instinctively, but stopped. She didn't need his help. She needed space. The facility rumbled, not collapsing, but shifting, adjusting to its new silence. All around them, doors clicked open. Empty rooms. Cleared pods. All data wiped. Lane whispered, It's over. Mara looked at him, her voice flat. No, this was the beginning. He didn't argue. She wasn't wrong. Every life she'd lived in that loop would never fade. They were inside her now. Echoes of 100 screams. And though she had left the chamber, the scars remained. Visible. Alive. And hers to carry. They walked the long corridor in silence. No alarms. No red lights. Just the soft hum of dying systems. As they neared the surface elevator, Mara paused. They'll rebuild this, she said. Lane nodded. Probably. Then we tell them what happened, she said. And if they erase it. He looked at her, then forward again. Then we become the memory. She smiled once, tired, bitter, honest. You finally stayed. Lane replied quietly. I should have the first time. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. They didn't look back. Whatever waited outside wouldn't change what they carried now. Not grief. Not vengeance. Just truth. Sharp, painful, and unstoppable. As the door shut behind them, the screen above flickered a final message. System, cleared. Subject, uncontrolled. And for once, the facility went dark not in failure, but in surrender. The elevator rose in silence. No music, no voiceover, just the soft whir of ascent and the mechanical pulse of electricity winding upward. Lane stood still, fists clenched, heart pacing towards something unspoken. Mara leaned against the railing, head tilted back, eyes closed, not resting, just existing. They didn't speak. Words were exhausted. They reached the surface and stepped into the main atrium. The sky beyond the reinforced glass was still dark, bruised with clouds. Outside, armed vehicles waited in silence. Not a blockade. A retrieval. Lane said nothing. Mara stepped forward, unafraid. They won't shoot, she said. They can't afford to. A voice cracked from the overhead intercom. Do not proceed. You are under facility jurisdiction. Lane laughed once. Dry and bitter. You lost jurisdiction the moment you lost control. And the doors opened. They stepped into the open. The cold hit them first. Wind laced with the sterile chill of high-altitude air. The vehicles remained still. A line of figures stood in silence, lab coats and armored guards, all faceless behind tinted visors. At their center stood the director, the same man who once offered Lane the contract. He hadn't aged. Or perhaps the lighting made him immortal. You weren't supposed to wake her, he said calmly. Mara stepped forward. You weren't supposed to use me? The director raised a hand. This is bigger than you understand. Lane growled. You always say that when you're hiding something. Silence. Then the director said, "You're not the first pair to walk out of Vault 6, but you're the first to survive it." Mara froze. "What?" The director smiled. This was never about containment. It was about compatibility. And Lane understood. They had been test subjects long before they ever entered. Mara stumbled back a step. "What do you mean we weren't the first?" The director's voice remained steady. Vault 6 was a prototype. Memory, emotion, loyalty, all variables. The cycle needed anchors. Repetition. Regression. Reconnection. Lane shouted, "You killed her 100 times." The director didn't blink. "And you let her." Mara turned to Lane, eyes wide with something deeper than anger. Betrayal. "You knew," she whispered. Lane shook his head. "No, I swear. But you signed the papers," she said. "You brought me here." The wind howled around them. Truth, raw and full of splinters, finally broke them open. Lane fell to his knees. "I thought I was saving you." She stood over him. "No, you were saving yourself." It wasn't an accusation. It was a eulogy. For what they had. For what he destroyed. And she didn't cry. Not anymore. The director gestured. One of the guards stepped forward with a small case. Inside, a new pod interface device, handheld and glowing faintly. "You've already been mapped," he said. This was the last cycle. Mara stared. "And what happens now? You decide," he replied. "We can't force you back in. We just need your permission." Lane stood slowly. "What if we refuse?" The director's eyes narrowed. "Then everything ends. And not just for you." Mara took the device. Her hands didn't shake. She looked to Lane, but not for approval. Only goodbye. "I remember everything now," she said. "Every scream. Every silence. Every time you walked away." Lane opened his mouth, but she pressed her hand to his chest. "Don't speak." Then she turned to the director and said, "You don't get to use us anymore. Not me, not him. End the program." And she crushed the device underfoot. The device shattered like glass, no sparks, no explosion. Just a pulse. Quiet. Final. What? The guards didn't move. The director stared at the fragments, then back at Mara. "You've doomed more than yourself," he said. Mara didn't flinch. "Then let the world feel what I felt." And with that, she turned. Lane followed, one step behind. They walked back through the ruins of what once was a sanctuary of science and silence. Now, nothing but a monument to betrayal. Above them, the facility's systems shut down. Lights dimmed. Cameras blinked out. Somewhere far below, every cryo chamber failed at once. No more loops. No more volunteers. Just truth breathing again. As they disappeared into the fog, Lane whispered, "I didn't save you." Mara said, "No, but this time you stayed." The wind swallowed them. And the silence that followed was not peace. It was consequence. They walked for hours. No destination. Just movement. Through fog-draped hills and silent trees, untouched by the hum of machines. The world outside the facility felt unreal, not peaceful, but indifferent. Lane's boots crunched over frost. Mara walked barefoot. She didn't complain. Her skin was pale, lips cracked, but her eyes burned with something Lane couldn't name. Not rage, not freedom, but awareness. Every step was heavier than the last. Lane tried to speak, but there was nothing left to say that wouldn't sound like an apology. And apologies didn't fix anything anymore. The sun tried to rise beyond the trees but failed, light choked by cloud. Mara finally stopped at the edge of a frozen stream. She looked into the water and saw no reflection. "Do you think we were ever real?" she asked. Lane answered quietly, "I don't know." And for once, truth didn't feel like enough. They found shelter in an abandoned ranger cabin. dust thick as snow, rusted tools on the walls, a broken lantern beside the door. Lane lit a fire with old wood and dry cloth. Mara sat by the flames, knees drawn to her chest. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The crackling filled the silence, louder than any scream. Lane finally asked, "What now?" Mara didn't look up. "You still think there's a now?" He shifted closer. "I think we survive." She stared at the fire, unmoving. "That's not the same as living." The flames flickered across her face. She wasn't angry. She was exhausted in a way that couldn't be fixed by sleep. Lane leaned back against the wall. "I stayed," he said. "At the end." Mara said, "Yes, you did." And though it was true, it didn't change what came before. Night fell. Cold pressed against the windows, but they didn't close them. Let the air move through. Let the dark in. Lane found a box of old clothes and offered her a pair of boots. She took them, said nothing. Outside the stars were faint, clouded by frost and the weight of what couldn't be undone. Lane stepped out alone for air. The forest stretched in every direction. No signs of pursuit. No evidence that anyone from the facility had come looking. It was as if the world had wiped it clean. Like it had never happened. Like they never happened. But they had. Every scar on Mara's back, every tremor in her voice, every silence they now shared. All of it real. Lane looked up at the sky and whispered, "You remember everything now. But I wish I could forget." Inside, Mara didn't cry. She had nothing left to lose. Morning came slowly. Mara stepped outside before Lane woke. The snow had deepened slightly, muffling the world. She stood barefoot again, boots forgotten by the door. Her toes pressed into the cold. She didn't flinch. She stared toward the tree line, not searching, just remembering. The wind moved through the branches like a voice that no longer needed to speak. She closed her eyes. Inside her mind, the facility still flickered, memories layered over memories. But now, she controlled the playback. She could pause. She could stop. She could live. Lane came to the doorway, blanket around his shoulders, watching her. "You're not going back," he said. Mara turned slightly, face calm. "There's no back anymore." He didn't step closer. He didn't need to. This wasn't a moment for rescue. It was recognition. She had found herself again. Not whole, but hers. Later that day, they walked down a dirt road that hadn't seen tire tracks in years. Birds chirped above. Life went on. The world, untouched by the ghosts they carried, spun forward. At a bend in the trail, Mara stopped. Lane paused behind her. She turned slowly and said one final thing, not cruel, not kind. Just true. "I remember now, all of it, and I don't forgive you." Lane nodded. He didn't flinch. "I know." They stood there, the wind moving between them, like the space between what was and what never would be again. Then, without another word, she walked ahead. Lane followed, a few steps behind. Not together. Not apart. Just surviving. And somewhere beneath the surface of their silence, the facility still hummed in ruin. Broken. Buried. But not forgotten. Because memory never dies. It waits.